Boys, this is the third class of the series. Unfortunately, for this series, it's going to be the last class. So we'll try to get in as much as we can. And then in Mitzvah Hashem, maybe next week we're going to start a more extended Tanya shir, and then apparently we're putting it on YouTube now. We have our YouTube channel going on, so everyone will be able to watch it from wherever they are. Okay, where we left off yesterday was our goal in being in this world is to work with our three garments. Our three garments being action, speech, and thought. Those are our three garments. And we have to use those three garments to not only change the world, but to change ourselves. And as we were talking about yesterday, really at any given moment, that is the time that we have to work on it. In other words, we discussed a little bit this morning the idea of how a person can get very caught up on all the things that he's done in the past, whether it's the past 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or 30 seconds ago, and how it could cause him to be very much in a negative mode, in a depression. And as the Alter Rebbe essentially says in chapter 26, unlike other depressions or unlike other negative points, there's a reason for feeling bad. I mean, the bottom line is that if we came down into this world and we messed things up, there's a good reason to feel bad about that. However, what the Alter Rebbe explains to us is that you have to figure out who's setting the agenda of feeling bad. In other words, if I'm sitting here in the middle of our class and I start remembering, oh my gosh, I did this and I did that, or if I'm sitting in front of my computer in the middle of work and I start thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that and I did the other thing, and then you could start and think to yourself, wow, I'm a real tzaddik, because I'm in the middle of work and I'm thinking about all the negative things that I did, and how I hurt my relationship with God, and you think, I must be a tzaddik, to be thinking about like. The answer is wrong. That's not in fact the truth. Actually, it's the opposite. Because we see, if that's the case, the opposite side, the nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, is the one that's setting the agenda. Right now, you have to be focusing on whatever it is that you're doing. There is a time and a place to be able to make what we call a cheshbon nefesh, which means an accounting of the soul, and to go over, you know what? Yesterday when I did such and such, I probably handled it poorly. Could have handled it a little bit better. And today when I did such and such, that was pretty good. I did a pretty good job at that. In other words, a cheshbon nefesh is not only a negative, looking at all the negative points, but it's also looking at the positive points. I did a pretty good job in that challenge, and I'm happy about that. But this other challenge, I really did a really lousy job, and I could have done better, and I have to do better. Okay, but in that scenario, I'm the one that's setting the agenda. It's not my nefesh bahamis that's coming in out of left field, and all of a sudden, in the middle of what I'm supposed to be doing, I'm start thinking about these things. So that's what we left off with yesterday. And we said that how am I supposed to be lifting up the world? How am I supposed to be lifting up myself? Through Torah and mitzvahs. That's how he finishes off this section of the Nefesh Elokis. He starts in chapter 4 where he talks about both Torah and mitzvahs being equal, and then in chapter 5 the Alter Rebbe describes how learning Torah is the greatest connection a person can have to Hashem. And even if you're learning something that is completely irrelevant to anything that ever did happen or will happen, what's special is that I am learning about the wisdom and the will of God. And just like any other relationship, when I am getting to know the other person in a human relationship, I want to know what makes that person think. I want to be connected to that person, not in just a very practical, tangible way, but what's in the mind of that person? Where's that person coming from? What is the will of that person? Where are they at? Now, it's in a very humanistic way, but also in a godly way. When I am trying to understand Hashem, I'm trying to build a relationship with Hashem, the more I'm going to learn Hashem's Torah, the more I'm going to develop that relationship. Okay, so that's the introduction to what we call the Nefesh Elokis, the godly soul. In chapter 6, he changes directions. And he says, okay, let's talk about the opposite side. We have a second soul inside of each one of us, and that is called the animal soul. Now, unlike where we have in our description in chapter Gimel, where he begins by describing, right, when we're talking about the actual character, of the Nefesh Elokis, over here he describes a situation where we have the intellect and then we have the emotions. In chapter 6, when he begins to describe the character of the animal soul, he starts off by saying we have emotions and we have intellect. It's a very subtle difference, but it's really the difference. It's from the absolute opposite extreme. And that is what it's all about. The Nefesh Bahamis runs with the emotions. It's constantly using the emotions. Emotions, and it's sending ideas up to your brain. Oh, maybe we should do this. Oh, maybe we should do that. Oh, we have to go here. We have to go there. Oh, yeah, why didn't I do this? Yeah. Anger and jealousy and all the different things. All it's emotions. And it's using our intellect, our brain, to rationalize why I should be feeling angry at this person, and why I should be feeling jealous at this person, and why this person, how could they do this to me, and why this, and why that. But it's the complete opposite of the way the Nefesh Elokis is set up. The Nefesh Elokis is set up that the intellect is supposed to be driving the emotions. No one's supposed to be just an intellectual person, as we talked about yesterday. But it's supposed to be a combination of emotions being driven by the intellect. The Nefesh Bahamis is the opposite. Nefesh Bahamis is emotions and using the intellect to rationalize the emotions. Okay? And then one of the scariest parts of Tanya is brought up, which I personally think is not one of the scariest parts, but one of the, I think it's the most optimistic part of the whole Tanya. And I'm just giving you, what is that? I remember when we were growing up, they had these things, you have parental discretion is advised or something. I don't know if they have that nowadays on TV or anything like that, but in the olden days when they first introduced HBO, they'd have parental discretion is advised. Okay, so parental discretion is advised. The Alter Rebbe begins chapter 6 by explaining that there are really two sides of this world, and only two sides of the world. What do I mean by that? Let me make a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shahakol niyeh bracha. Amen. Most of the Jewish world will look at life as being divided into three parts. You have the mitzvahs. So that's something called kedusha. That's holiness. That's great. That's wonderful, right? And then you have the averas. The averas are right the sins that a person does. That's terrible. That's horrible. It's, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have 90% of your life, which is like neutral, right? You're playing tennis. It's good. Why not? You're going, doing this, doing that, doing whatever it is that you're doing. Neutral. So you have three parts to the world. You have the godly part, the devil part, so to speak, and then you have the in-between, which is most of life. Along comes Alter Rebbe and says that is really not the paradigm according to Kabbalah. The paradigm according to Kabbalah is that you only have two sides to the world. You have either it's godly or it's something called Sitra Acher, the other side, right? Sitra Acher, the other side. It's either godly or it's klipos. Klipos means shells, which means that there's something, it's on the outside that's all we see. And obviously there's something much deeper inside of it, but all we are experiencing is the shell of it. And therefore it's something negative, it's something superficial, it's something that's not the way we're supposed to be involved. Now, with that in mind, the Alter Rebbe is saying here in chapter 6, either you're involved in Kedusha, or you're all of a sudden, by definition, you're involved in Klipa, which is very scary, all of a sudden. Because what happened to the 90% neutrality that I was living with for the last 50 years? So the Alter Rebbe, one little stroke of the pen just wiped out that whole thing. So what are we supposed to do with this? So the Alter Rebbe explains that according to the Kabbalistic paradigm, it's either one way or the other. Which means, essentially, that every given moment of my life, there is no such thing as neutrality. Either I'm doing something godly or the opposite. It can't be anything else because there is nothing else. Now that is a very sobering concept for most of us. But it's also a very optimistic concept, in my opinion, because all of a sudden now you know and I know that at any given moment of my life, I'm supposed to be using my time here in this world to do godly things, to elevate the world, to change the world. There is no such thing as neutrality. It doesn't exist. Now, along in chapter 7, he comes along and says, now that we've explained that there are only two sides, either godly or the opposite, I'm going to add one more kicker. In the opposite side, there is a realm that can be elevated. And not only can be elevated, that's what I was sent into the world to do, to elevate. So for instance, a cow. A cow is not a holy thing. It's not Kedusha. It's not godly. Right? It's certainly not neutral, because there is no such thing as neutral. Right? We just established that. Right? So, what is it? It's klipa. It's klipa, but it's called klipas noga, the shining klipa, which means that if I follow the directions, I follow the instructions and the instruction manual, right, the user's guide or whatever you want to call it, I can take that cow and I can elevate the sparks. I can elevate that cow and change not only the cow but the entire existence and bring more Kedusha into the world, bring more holiness into the world. That's what I'm supposed to be doing here. How do I do it? Right? So I take the cow and a person, right, they shech the cow in a kosher way, and then they salt the meat and they soak the meat and they take away all the forbidden fats and they do, and etc. And then you serve the food on Shabbos, the meat on Shabbos for the Shabbos meal, and you eat it not like an animal eats things, like diving into it, right? But you eat it in a way that's a sensitive, edel, kosher, dignified, good word, way. And I use it with the concept that I'm with my brain being involved. My brain has to be involved. My friend in Israel, Gil Locks, he always says a nice word. He says, when does tzedakah begin? When I give the coin to the poor person? Or is it when I put my hand in my pocket? Or maybe it's when I take the money out of the ATM and put it into my pocket. Or maybe it's when I put my check into the machine. Or maybe it's when I get the check from my boss. Or maybe it's when I work. Or maybe it's when I get up in the morning and go to work. It's all in the mind. And that's what I meant before by saying that chapter 6 is the most optimistic chapter. Because there is an entire world of what we will call, even though it's not true, neutrality. But I have to use my brain, I have to use my soul to focus on taking that world, which we know is not neutral, it's klipa, and elevating it. That means I have to be completely immersed, involved, aware, and not on automatic pilot in my life. Which means that when I'm going to work all of a sudden, it could become a godly act if I look at it from that perspective and I treat it that way. Or it could be a very negative act if I look at it that way. So all of a sudden, what we've done now is we haven't changed the equation. We haven't now said that there's a third part. We have not said that there is a neutrality. It's just that what we've said now is based on how I approach my life, there is a whole realm that I have the potential to elevate. But if I do not, so to speak, push myself, if I do not click into this, then by definition it's going to be negative. It's almost like, I think we were explaining yesterday that my example of the escalator that goes down. The cow is the escalator that's going down. However, if I go and I click in and I all of a sudden put that into my brain and I focus, and now I'm going about my life in this way, in this manner, I could then be on that escalator going down, but walking up it. As soon as I stop, it starts going down again. You got what I'm saying? That's life. So when I have my 10 minutes and I decide, you know what? I'm in this world and God gave me a body. And God gave me this body to take care of. That means that it's on loan. It's not my body. It's on loan. Right? So I have to take care of it. So in order to take care of it, what do I need to do? I have to exercise, for example. I have to eat right. I have to take care of it. So all of a sudden, when I'm going outside and running for 25 minutes or 30 minutes, it could be a completely godly act. Or it could be a completely hedonistic act. So it depends on how do I look at it. What am I using my time for? What am I using my words for? What am I using my thoughts for? Again, there's clear things that are Kedusha when I'm learning Torah. But God doesn't only want us to be involved in learning Torah. God doesn't want us to be sitting in the Himalaya mountains, right, looking at my nose, reading only Torah and not eating and fasting for the next 120 years. He wants us to be involved with eating and drinking and being involved in the world and getting married, having children, right, building a family, going to work, being involved in the world. It's much easier to not be involved in the world and live this spiritual life than to have to get along with another person, your wife, have to get along with your children, have to get along with trying to make a parnasa, where you're going to have to, pay for education, and you have to pay for the food on the table, and you're going to have to pay for your mortgage, and you're going to have to pay for... That's the concept of Yosef HaTzadik, like we saw in this week and last week's parasha, right? Yosef HaTzadik was in Mitzrayim, was the leader of basically the greatest superpower of that time. And what was he doing? He was being a frum Jew. That was the concept. He showed that you didn't have to be a shepherd to be a frum Jew. You could be the prime minister of the biggest country in the entire world and still be a frum Jew. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is saying here. So when we say that it's two sides, the world, either Kedusha or not, it's not a scary thought, like we said in the beginning. It's an optimistic thought. It means that I have been given the privilege to elevate this world. And that's my responsibility. And at any given moment over the course of the day, I have to keep that in my mind, because Kabbalah tells us that every act that I do of kindness, of goodness, whether it's with someone else or even with myself, you're changing not just me, but the entire existence. And that is really what is going on inside of me. And that leads us to chapter 9, and we say, now we see that there is actually a war going on inside of myself. Because I have part of me, my godly soul, which is entrenched in my animal soul, which is entrenched in my body, that is screaming out, it's all for God. And I'm a piece of God. And that's really who I am. In my essence, that's who I am. That's what I am. And I was sent here on a mission to change the world. And my body and my animal soul is turning around and saying, what's in it for me? What do I get out of this? Is this really going to be fun? Do I really have to do this? I want to do this. I want to be lazy. I want to be, I want to be egotistical. I want to become a big rabbi. Right? That's also ego. Right? And so this is the fight that's taking place all day long. So there's a famous rabbi that lived in Eretz Yisrael, passed away in the early 1970s, and he was a teacher of most of the great rabbis in the Chabad movement to this day. And he used to say that whenever you have a thought coming into your brain, you have to apply the following rule. When someone comes to your house and they knock on the door, the first thing you ask is, who's there? Who's there? Who's there? Same thing, when a thought comes into your mind, who's there? Who's sending this thought? Where is this thought coming from? And that will keep you on the ball. That's the idea. Now, after that introduction, let me just try to finish. After that introduction, the Alter Rebbe gets into the holistic way, which means really mayach shalit al halev, which means the brain is really able, by my birth, able to control my emotions. It's set up that way, unless I've messed it up completely, which we talk about a little bit later on. But really, that's how it was set up. And therefore, the objective is to work hard to reframe in my mind what I'm doing here, and to reframe my whole perspective on life, and to constantly be pushing myself in this direction of meditating and focusing and trying to not allow what I see with my physical eyes to change the reality of what's really going on here, which is I'm here in a garden, I'm here in a godly world, and it's my job to bring out the godliness that's here. And to try to say to the Nefesh HaBahamis that life in this world is not about you. It's just not about you. It's not about my ego. It's not about getting into fights. It's not about this. It's about bringing out the godliness that's there. And that's a holistic way that needs to, a person has to work on for 120 years, one step after another, with my actions, with my speech, with my thought, always working in this direction. And really the object is to constantly be changing myself. And like it says in chapter 15, what's a success? What's a success? How do you know if you're succeeding or not? So the Alter Rebbe explains over there, the way to recognize whether you're succeeding or not is, where was I yesterday? Where was I a couple of hours ago? Can I say that I'm holding in a better place? Can I go beyond myself? With me, Judaism is not a team sport. It's not a competitive sport with someone else. It's not me compared to Gavriel, right? Or me compared to Moshe, or me compared to anyone else. It's me in competition with my Nefesh HaBahamis. And not only that, I'll tell you one more point. We're running out of time already. This happens every day. But I wanted to introduce you to your best friend. Who do you think is your best friend in the entire world?
I'm faded.
Well, that's true, of course. In addition to me. But who's everyone's best friend?
My mommy and Tati.
Your best friend is your Nefesh HaBahamis. Your animal soul is your best friend. Because why? Because your Nefesh HaBahamis is been put in the world to show you where you need to work. God created your Nefesh HaBahamis as much as He creates your Nefesh HaLokis. God created the Nefesh HaBahamis to come down into each one of our lives in order to show us where we need to work on our lives. Why are we sent down here into this world? I have a problem. I'm fighting with Gavriel all day long, so I know that the Nefesh HaBahamis is the one that's pushing me. This is where I need to work. This is what I have. This is why I was sent down here. Obviously, I don't have to work on something else. Maybe that is, someone else is feeling jealousy all the time about something. I don't feel jealous about these things. So that's not where my work is. That's not why I came down here. I came down here to work on a different midah, to work on changing this aspect of myself, to recognize that this is why the Nefesh HaBahamis is pushing me here and pushing me there and pushing me the other place. Because he's coming to be my coach. And if you look at it and you see where it is that the Nefesh HaBahamis is pushing me, that's where I know that I have to work. That's where I know that I was sent down here to fulfill that mission. And the only one that can do it is me. Because no one else could fulfill what I'm supposed to fulfill while I'm in this world. And the fact that I'm here is a proof, without a shadow of a doubt, that the Rebbe explains, that Hashem needs me to be here to be doing my portion. And my portion might be every single day the same fight, again and again and again and again and again and again and again. That's accomplishing. The fight is the accomplishment. The effort is the accomplishment. It's not like, like in secular studies, when you get your degree, that's when you know you've accomplished. That's when you know you've won. It's not that way at all in Yiddishkeit. In Yiddishkeit, it's the day in, day out of the fighting, of the pushing oneself, going beyond myself in any way that I can, and recognizing there ain't no such thing as neutrality. I'm in this world to change the world, to change myself, to use my moments here. And unfortunately, they're limited, the moments, for all of us. So take advantage of the time that you're here. Take advantage of changing your perspective. And what I've been trying to do over the last 3 days is really just giving you a little bit of food for thought and trying to get you to be interested in learning more, because this was only a taste, really, of what Tanya is talking about, what Chassidus is talking about. But there's so much there's so much available, and it's really a matter of learning yourselves and teaching yourselves and not holding yourself back from this information. Like we were talking about this morning in this morning's class, at the end of the day, this is an instruction book for life. And what the Alter Rebbe is doing here is he's giving us the playbook of the other team. Why not read it? Read it so that we know what's happening. You understand what is happening in my life. You understand why I have so many voices in my head speaking to me. And all these different feelings of guilt and feelings of happiness and feeling of this. And where is it coming from? What is it all about? Yeah, okay.
How do we perform the act when we get thought to distinguish, is this Yetzer Hara or is this Yetzer Tov?
Oh, well then this is what it talks about on Tanya. To learn the lessons, seeing, to be able to recognize who is the Yetzer Tov, or the Nefesh Bahamias and the Nefesh Elokis, and then how to once you recognize it, what to do about it, and where to go with it. Definitely, it's all written out. Well, chapters 12, 13, 14 deal specifically with that, and then you could. It depends. We have to. It's much more detailed. It's not general. So we want to stick to the details. Yeah.
Can you repeat what's the Klipa Noga? I always get confused with that.
Klipas Noga means that inside of the world of Klipa, which is what we're calling negativity, we'll call it that. I don't know if that's the exact best translation, but we'll call it that for the time being. In that world, there are 3 levels of Klipa, which does not mean 1, 2, 3, like the higher, the middle, and the lowest. That's like really low. No, it means Chesed of Klipa, Gvura of Klipa, and Tiferes of Klipa. That's what it means. Okay, so those 3 levels of Klipa are areas that we cannot elevate. For example, a non-kosher animal. I could shecht it, I could salt the meat, I can make the biggest bracha with every different kavana of the Arizal, with all the Kabbalistic ideas behind it. There is absolutely nothing I can do to elevate that piece of non-kosher meat. It's just the way it goes. That's it. Klipas Noga, however, is a klipa, but I have the potential to elevate the godly sparks that are inside of it. And that's what I'm supposed to do. And not only am I supposed to do it, that's my responsibility. So an apple, for example, very simple thing, an apple, right? An apple has godly sparks in it that can be elevated, which will change not only the apple, but it'll also change the whole existence according to Chassidus, right? So if I behave like I'm supposed to behave, and I have the right kavanas, and I make a bracha, and I'm eating it like in a dignified way, right? So then what I've done is I've released the sparks of godliness that are in this apple, so that way they can become elevated and change the world.
Raise the sparks.
Right. However, if I don't do that, right? So then, even though it was klipas noga, so now it all goes down. And so that's really what the world calls, the neutrality, but we now defined it not as neutral. So when I go to play tennis, right, tennis, it's certainly not written up anywhere in the Torah that playing tennis is a mitzvah, but on the other hand, it's certainly not written up anywhere that it's an avera either, right? However, if I approach it in a way that I'm trying to be healthy and I'm getting more energy for my body, that I could be able to learn better and to do mitzvahs better and all these things, so all of a sudden, I could take this neutral act and I can elevate this neutral act. Or, the opposite. And that's where we're going with that. Okay? Yeah?
You know how you were talking about like a cow and that you can use it for either mitzvahs or avera. What about a pig?
Well, that's what I just said before. That something like that, a non-kosher animal, there's nothing I can do about that. That's something that I just have to lay off, and because I can't elevate it, not now at least.
But so that means that it's just not in our realm to even touch on.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not in our power. Hashem has not given me the power to be able to elevate that.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
So this is a quick one. I'm talking about using those three garments: action, speech, and thought, to change the world and change ourselves. Is there a sense that we need to change ourselves first before going out and changing the world, or are they supposed to be done parallel tracks simultaneously?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think simultaneously is the way to go. Right. Yeah.
Sort of off of Will's question, if you have, for some reason, a pig or bacon or something, would you be able to sort of like use it for a godly purpose if you gave it to a goy who was in need of a meal?
That's an interesting question. There is such an idea that by not eating it, by not partaking in it, in a certain way, it's like elevating it in a certain way. But it's certainly not the same thing as, it's not the same thing.
It as tzedakah also.
So can you give that? Are you allowed to have benefit from it? That's a very big question. So that brings in a whole other realm in halacha, which we're not going to go into now. But there are certain things that you can have benefit from that are not kosher, and there are certain things you cannot have benefit from that are. And you could say, well, this is the halacha, meaning that this is the Jewish law, that this is the way this is. But you have to remember, as Tanya is teaching us, there's a lot of spirituality behind that halacha. So if you can't have benefit for it, by getting benefit from it, you're causing big problems. And other things that you can have benefit from, so by having benefit from it, then it's a good thing. So, right, everything has to be looked at, and even in, when you presumably you've learned a lot about halacha just even the last few days, there are certain situations in halacha where a rabbi, in one scenario, he will paskin this is not allowed, and in another scenario, he'll paskin this is allowed. So a lot of it is, on the shoulders of the holy rabbi that is making it also to change actually the reality, which is very, very fascinating when you look at it from a spiritual point of view. He is actually changing the reality of the scenario to make it into a godly thing or the opposite, which is fascinating, I think.
Is pork in general something that you're not allowed to have benefit from?
Is pork? I have to think about it. I don't remember. It hasn't come up recently in my lexicon. Yeah.
I have a Hasidic question.
Yeah.
What is bittul? I always hear that, but it's I know it says it's nullifying, but I just still I'm a little lost.
So bittul literally means to nullify something, like you said. But the way it's used in the vernacular is that our nefesh bahami is really a self-centered entity, right? So, for example, if I go and even help you, you could stop a second, look a little bit deeper. Where is that coming from? Why am I helping you? It could be that I'm helping you because I think that tomorrow you're going to turn around and help me back in some way, or you're going to give me a donation, or you're going to, you're going to scratch my back. I scratch your back, you scratch my back. One of those types of things. So that is really, as much as it's very nice that I'm giving, let's say I'm giving you tzedakah, I'm giving the guy, $10 or whatever it is, right? At the end of the day, that's the most important thing. You gave something, right? But when you go into a little bit more depth into the story, you could see that it could be a very egotistical, story behind the story, shall we say. So our objective in terms of working on ourselves and in terms of developing ourselves is really to go deeper and try to get to a point where I'm not giving you $10 because I want to get $10 back, or I'm going to get, maybe God's going to make me win the lottery or something like that, but because I want to just help you for the sake of helping you. Not so being bittul means that I'm able to, so to speak, give away myself and really think about another, or think about whatever is, the prevalent cause at that moment that we're working towards, or when in relationship with someone else, how much am I sticking myself into the relationship? So that's really the vernacular of becoming more of a bittul person. That's how it's used.
Oh, wow,
Okay?
That explains it. That makes it crystal clear.
All right. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.